Okay, back to business. Okay, where did we leave off? The adventures of Chancellor and Parlet. How they went to the mountains to eat nuts. The nuts are quite ripe now, said Chancellor to his wife. Parlet, suppose we go together to the mountains and eat as many as we can before the squirrels take them away. With all my heart, said Parlet. Let us go and make a holiday of it together. So they went to the mountains, and as it was a lovely day, they stayed there till the evening. Now whether it was that they had eaten so many nuts that they could not walk, or whether they were lazy and would not, I do not know. However, they took it into their heads that it did not become them to go home on foot. So Chancellor began to build a little carriage of nutshells, and when it was finished, Parlet jumped into it and sat down, and bid Chancellor harness himself to it and draw her home. That's a good joke, said Chancellor. No, that will never do. I had rather by half walk home. I'll sit on the box and be coachman if you like, but I will not draw. While this was passing, a duck came quacking up and cried out, You thieving varmints! What business have you in my ground? I'll give it you well for your insolence. And upon that she fell upon Chancellor most lustily. But Chancellor was no coward, and returned the duck's blows with his sharp spurs so fiercely that she soon began to cry out for mercy, which was only granted her upon condition that she would draw the carriage home for them. This she agreed to do, and the Chancellor got upon the box and drove, crying, Now, duck, get on as fast as you can. And away they went at a pretty good pace. After they had traveled along a little way, they met a needle and a pin walking together along the road. The needle cried out, Stop! Stop! And said it was too dark. It was so dark that they could hardly find their way, and such dirty walking they could not get on at all. He told him that he and his friend, the pin, had been at a public house a few miles off, and had sat drinking till they had forgotten how late it was. They begged therefore that the travelers would be so kind as to give them a lift in their carriage. Chancellor, observing that they were but thin fellows, and not likely to take up much room, told them they might ride, but made them promise not to dirty the wheels of the carriage in getting in, nor to tread on Parlet's toes. Late at night they arrived at an inn, and as it was bad traveling in the dark, the duck seemed much tired and waddled about a good deal from one side to the other. They made up their minds to fix their quarters there. But the landlord at first was unwilling, and said his house was full, thinking they might not be very respectable company. However, they spoke civilly to him, and gave him the egg which Parlet had laid by the way, and said they would give him the duck, who was in the habit of laying one every day. So at last he let them come in, and they bespoke a handsome supper, and spent the evening very jollily. Early in the morning, before it was quite light, and when nobody was stirring in the inn, Chancellor awakened his wife, and fetching the egg, they pecked a hole in it, ate it up, and threw the shells into the fireplace. They then went to the pin and needle, who were fast asleep, and seizing them by their heads, stuck one into the landlord's easy chair, and the other into his handkerchief. And having done this, they crept away as softly as possible. However, the duck, who slept in the open air in the yard, heard them coming, and jumped into the brook, which ran close by the inn, soon swam out of their reach. An hour or two afterwards, the landlord got up and took his handkerchief to wipe his face, but the pin ran into him and pricked him. Then he walked into the kitchen to light his pipe for the fire, but when he stirred it up, the eggshells flew into his eyes and almost blinded him. "Bless me," said he, "all the world seems to have a design against my head this morning." And so saying, he threw himself sulkily into his easy chair. But oh dear, the needle ran into him, and this time the pain was not in his head. He now flew into a great passion, and suspecting the company who had come the night before, he went to look after them, but they were all off. So he swore that he never again would take in such a troop of vagabonds, who ate a great deal, paid no reckoning, and gave him nothing for his trouble but their impish tricks. How Chancellor and Partlet went to visit Mr. Korbes. Another day, Chancellor and Partlet wished to ride out together, so Chancellor built a handsome carriage with 4 red wheels, and harnessed 6 mice to it. And then he and Partlet got into the carriage and away they drove. Soon afterwards, a cat met them and said, "Where are you going?" And the Chancellor replied, "All on our way, a visit to pay to Mr. Korbes the fox today." Then the cat said, "Take me with you." Chancellor said, "With all my heart, get up behind, and be sure you do not fall off. Take care of this handsome coach of mine, nor dirty my pretty red wheels so fine. Now mice, be ready, and wheels run steady, for we are going to a visit to pay Mr. Korbes the fox today." Soon after, all came up a milestone, an egg, a duck, and a pin, and the Chancellor gave them all leave to get into the carriage and go with them. When they arrived at Mr. Korbes' house, he was not at home, so the mice drew the carriage into the coach house. Chancellor and Partlet flew upon a beam. The cat sat down in the fireplace. The duck got into the washing cistern. The pin stuck himself into the bed pillow, and the millstone laid himself over the house, and the egg rolled herself up in the towel. When Mr. Korbes came home, he went to the fireplace to make a fire, but the cat threw all the ashes in his eyes, so he ran into the kitchen to wash himself. But there the duck splashed all the water up in his face, and when he tried to wipe himself, the egg broke into pieces in the towel all over his face and eyes. Then he was very angry and went without his supper to bed. But when he laid his head on the pillow, the pin ran into his cheek. Oh, side sleeper. At this he became quite furious, and jumping up, would have run out of the house. But when he came to the door, the millstone fell down on his head and killed him on the spot. Dang. How Partlet died and was buried, and how Chancellor died of grief. Another day, Chancellor and Partlet agreed to go again to the mountains to eat nuts, and it was settled that all the nuts which they found should be shared equally between them. Now Partlet found a very large nut, but she said nothing about it to the Chancellor, and kept it all to herself. However, it was so big that she could not swallow it, and stuck it in her throat. Then she was in a great fright, and cried out to Chancellor, "Pray run as fast as you can, and fetch me some water, or I shall be choked." Chancellor ran as fast as he could to the river, and said, "River, give me some water, for Partlet lies on the mountain, and will be choked by a great nut." The river said, "Run first to the bride, and ask her for a silken cord to draw up the water." Chancellor ran to the bride and said, "Bride, you must give me a silken cord, for then the river will give me water, and the water I will carry to Partlet, who lies on the mountain, and will be choked by a great nut." But the bride said, "Run first and bring me my garland that is hanging on the willow in the garden." The Chancellor ran to the garden and took the garland from the bough where it hung, and brought it to the bride. And then the bride gave him the silken cord, and he took the silken cord to the river, and the river gave him the water, and he carried the water to Partlet. But in the meantime she was choked by the great nut, and lay quite dead, and never moved any more. Then Chancellor was very sorry, and cried bitterly, and all the beasts came and wept with him over poor Partlet. And 6 mice built a little hearse to carry her to her grave, and when it was ready, they harnessed themselves before it, and Chancellor drove them. On the way they met the fox. "Where are you going, Chancellor?" said he. "To bury my Partlet," said the other. "May I go with you?" said the fox. "Yes, but you must get behind, or my horses will not be able to draw you." Then the fox got up behind, and presently the wolf, the bear, the goat, and all the beasts of the wood came and climbed upon the hearse. So on they went till they came to a rapid stream. "How shall we get over?" said the Chancellor. Then said the straw, "I will lay myself across, and you may pass over me." But as the mice were going, the straw slipped away and fell into the water, and the 6 mice all fell in and were drowned. What was to be done? Then a large log of wood came and said, "I am big enough. I will lay myself across the stream, and you shall pass over me." So he laid himself down, but they managed so clumsily that the log of wood fell in and was carried away by the stream. And a stone, who saw what had happened, came up and kindly offered to help poor Chancellor by laying himself across the stream, and this time he got safely to the other side with the hearse, and managed to get Partlet out of it. But the fox and the other mourners who were sitting behind were too heavy, and fell back into the water, and were all carried away by the stream and drowned. Thus Chancellor was left alone with his dead Partlet, and having dug a grave for her, he laid her in it, and made a little hillock over her. Then he sat down by the grave, and wept and mourned till at last he died too, and so all were dead. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was in the middle of winter, when the broad flakes of snow were falling around, that a certain queen sat working at a window, the frame of which was made of fine black ebony, and as she was looking out upon the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon it. Then she gazed thoughtfully upon the red drops which sprinkled the white snow, and said, "Would that my little daughter may be as white as that snow, as red as the blood, and as black as the mahogany window frame." And so the little girl grew up. Her skin was as white as snow, her cheeks as rosy as the blood, and her hair as black as mahogany, ebony. And she was called Snow White. But the queen died, and the king soon married another wife, who was very beautiful, but so proud that she could not bear to think that anyone could surpass her. She had a magical looking-glass, to which she used to go and gaze upon herself in it and say, "Mirror, mirror, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is the fairest? Tell me who." And the mirror answered, "Thou, queen, art fairest in the land." But Snow White grew more and more beautiful, and when she was 7 years old, she was as bright as the day and fairer than the queen herself. Then the mirror one day answered the queen when she went to consult it as usual, "Thou, queen, mayest fair and beauteous be, but Snow White is lovelier than thee." When she heard this, she turned pale with rage and envy, and called to one of her servants and said, "Take Snow White away into the wide wood, that I may never see her more." Then the servant led her away, but his heart melted when she begged him to spare her life, and he said, "I will not hurt thee, thou pretty child." So he left her by herself, and though he thought it most likely that the wild beasts would tear her to pieces, he felt as if a great weight were taken off his heart when he had made up his mind not to kill her, but to leave her to her fate. Then poor Snow White wandered along through the wood in great fear, and the wild beasts roared about her, but none did her any harm. In the evening she came to a little cottage, and went in there to rest herself, for her little feet would carry her no further. Everything was spruce and neat in the cottage. On the table was spread a white cloth, and there were 7 little plates with 7 little loaves and 7 little glasses with wine in them, and knives and forks lay in order. And by the wall stood 7 little beds. Then as she was very hungry, she picked a little piece of each loaf and drank a little wine out of each glass. And after that, she thought she would lie down and rest. So she tried all the little beds, and one was too long and the other too short, till at last the 7th suited her. And there she laid down herself and went to sleep. Presently in came the masters of the cottage, who were 7 little dwarfs that lived among the mountains, and dug and searched about for gold. They lightened up their 7 lamps, and saw directly that all was not right. The first said, "Who has been sitting on my stool?" The second, Who has been eating off my plate? The third, Who has been picking my bread? The fourth, Who has been meddling with my spoon? The fifth, Who has been handling my fork? The sixth, Who has been cutting with my knife? The seventh, Who has been drinking my wine? Then the first looked around and said, Who has been lying on my bed? And the rest came running in, and everyone cried out that somebody had been upon his bed. But the seventh saw Snow White, and called all his brethren to come and see her. And they cried out with wonder and astonishment, and brought their lamps to look at her, and said, Good heavens, what a lovely child she is! And they were delighted to see her, and took care not to wake her. And the seventh dwarf slept an hour with each of the other dwarfs in turn, till the night was gone. In the morning, Snow White told them all her story, and they pitied her, and said if she would keep all things in order and cook. Here's a picture of the dwarfs. And wash and knit and spin for them, she might stay where she was, and they would take good care of her. Then they went out all day long to their work, seeking for gold and silver in the mountains, and Snow White remained at home. And they warned her and said, The queen will soon find out where you are, so take care not to let anyone in. But the queen, now that she thought Snow White was dead, believed that she was certainly the handsomest lady in the land. She went to the mirror and said, Mirror, mirror, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is fairest? Tell me who. The mirror answered, Thou, queen, art the fairest in all this land. But over the hill, in the green wood shade, where the 7 dwarfs are dwelling, their dwelling have made, there Snow White is hiding her head, and she is lovelier far, O queen, than thee. Then the queen was very much alarmed, for she knew that the mirror always spoke the truth, and was sure that the servant had betrayed her. And she could not bear to think that anyone lived who was more beautiful than she was. So she disguised herself as an old peddler, and went her way over the hills to the place where the dwarfs dwelt. Then she knocked at the door and cried, Farewells to sell. Snow White looked out at the widow and said, Good day, good woman. What have you to sell? Good wares, fine wares, said she, laces and bobbins of all colors. I will let the old lady in. She seems to be a very good sort of body, thought Snow White, so she ran down and unbolted the door. Bless me, said the old woman, how badly your stays are laced. Let me lace them up with one of my nice new laces. Snow White did not dream of any mischief, so she stood up before the old woman, but she set to work so nimbly and pulled the lace so tight that Snow White lost her breath and fell down as if she were dead. There's an end of all thy beauty, said the spiteful queen, and went away home. In the evening the 7 dwarfs returned, and I need not say how grieved they were to see their faithful Snow White stretched upon the ground motionless. as if she were dead. However, they lifted her up, and when they found what was the matter, they cut the lace, and in a little time she began to breathe, and soon came to life again. Then they said, "The old woman was the queen herself. Take care another time, and let no one in when we are away." When the queen got home, she went straight to the mirror and spoke to it as usual. But to her great surprise, it still said, "Thou, queen, art the fairest in all this land. But over the hills, in the green wood shade, where the 7 dwarfs are dwelling, have made, there Snow White is hiding her head, and she is lovelier far, far, O queen, than thee." The blood ran cold in her heart with spite and malice to see that Snow White still lived, and she dressed herself up again in disguise, but very different from the one she wore before, and took with her a poisoned comb. When she reached the dwarf's cottage, she knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell." But Snow White said, "I dare not let anyone in." Then the queen said, "Only look at my beautiful combs," and gave her the poisoned one. And it looked so pretty that she took it up and put it into her hair to try. But the moment it touched her head, the poison was so powerful that she fell down seamless. "There you may lay," said the queen, and went away. But by good luck, the dwarfs returned very early that evening, and when they saw Snow White lying on the ground, they thought what had happened, and soon found the poisoned comb. And when they took it away, she recovered and told them all that had passed, and they warned her once more not to open the door to anyone. Meantime, the queen went home to her mirror and trembled with rage when she received exactly the same answer as before. And she said, "Snow White shall die if it costs me my life." So she went secretly into a chamber and prepared a poisoned apple. The outside looked very rosy and tempting, but whoever tasted it was sure to die. When she dressed herself up as a peasant's wife, and traveled over the hills to the dwarf's cottage and knocked at the door, but Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anyone in, for the dwarfs have told me not." "Do as you please," said the old woman, "but at any rate, take this pretty apple. I will make you a present of it." "No," said Snow White, "I dare not take it." "Oh, silly girl," answered the other, "what are you afraid of? Do you think it is poisoned? Come, do you eat one part, and I will eat the other." Now the apple was so prepared that one side was good, though the other side was poisoned. Then Snow White was very much tempted to taste, for the apple looked exceedingly nice. And when she saw the old woman eat, she could refrain no longer. But she had scarcely put the piece into her mouth when she fell down dead upon the ground. This time nothing will save thee," said the queen, and she went home to her mirror. And at last it said, "Thou, queen, art the fairest of all the fair.